What's going on YouTube? Today I decided to do a review on Pure Synth 2 Platinum by Jamal Hartwell and the Gospel Musicians team. Now, I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of sound demoing today, so if that's something you're interested in, I encourage you to check out the Gospel Musicians YouTube channel. I believe Jamal has about 3 videos that sort of showcase and show some of the sounds from the factory library. But instead today I wanted to cover the UI, some of the highlights, as well as get into a few tips and tricks to get you started in terms of basic synth design if that's something relatively new to you. Now, I also included in this video a timestamp in the description, so if there's a certain part you want to jump to as we go along, feel free to do so. So let's start up here at the top. We have a view function in which we can sort of shrink this plugin or make it larger. Here we have a left or right arrow to switch between presets. And here in this LCD screen, there's a drop-down arrow. And this will actually take us to our factory presets inside Pure Synth. The Pure Sign library, which is included, and the user presets. Now, later on in this video, I will demonstrate how to edit as well as to save your own user presets. Next to that, we have our save disk icon, our piano roll, and a settings tool. Below that, these tabs right here, we have a control section, an insert effects, a reverb, a master effects, and next to there we have a mixer. So let's get started with the oscillator section. In the oscillator section, basically Pure Synth 2 gives you 4 different oscillators to sort of layer your sound with. Over here to the far left, we have a toggle on and off switch. Below that, we also have another screen with a drop-down box which take you to your oscillator types, where you can pick wave tables, waveforms, or the actual samples themselves. Now, what's pretty cool about this, if you pick in a particular section that you're interested in this case, we're going to use a basic SAW 31, you then can use the left and right arrows to sort of preview those sounds. Now, below that, we have our volume knob, our gain, or the signal incoming from the oscillator. We have our pan left and right, the transposition button, and semitones, and a sense knob, which basically applies some fine tuning when you have one voice on. Next to that, we have our octave section, in which if you hold down your mouse, you can drag down or up and change the octave. Below that, we have a pulse width modulation knob. Now, to demonstrate that better, I'm going to actually move over to Omnisphere. So here we have a square waveform in Omnisphere, and just listen as I pull up pulse width modulation. So just a great way to add a different texture to your sound. Next to that, we have a voices knob. You can think of voices as layering an oscillator or duplicating an oscillator. It gives you up to 8 voices. Now, keep in mind, Pure Synth 2 Platinum has 128 polyphony, but as you raise more and more voices across 4 different oscillators, that will increase your CPU load. Next to that, we have a detune feature. Now, if you have it currently selected on one voice, the detune will not be engaged. But as I introduce the voices, you hear the detuning. Now, there's 2 different types of detuning within Pure Synth 2. You have a detune 1 is based upon a classic mode or a regular style detuning, and a detune 2, which is based upon a JP Super Saw-ish type of detuning. Let's listen to both of them. Subtle, but adds a different flavor. Next to that, we have a spread knob, which can increase the stereo feel of your sound. And below that, we have a blend knob. The blend knob basically takes both detuning types, 1 and 2, and sort of combines them according to their algorithm. It gives you a lot of possibilities right there. This is the oscillator section. And before we move on, one last thing. If you right-click on a lot of these parameters, you'll notice you'll have a Learn MIDI CC function. as well as you can modulate with an envelope, an LFO, or the mod wheel. Next, we have our amp envelope section. And in Pure Synth 2, you have 5 settings: the attack, the hold, the decay, sustain, and release. So basically, how quickly do you want your sound to rise? How long do you want it to stay at that highest level? How quickly does it fall to the sustain level? And how long does it take to fade out after you release a note? To the right of there, we have a velocity curve, which you can change depending on how you play with your mouse. And below that, we have an amount knob. The amount knob sets the dynamic range for incoming MIDI. So if you want less dynamics, you can turn this knob down. Or if you want to play more dynamically or have more dynamic range for your incoming MIDI, you can turn this amount up. So below that, we have a keyboard knob. This section emulates the feel and playback of an acoustic piano in which the higher notes decay faster than the lower notes. Now below that, you'll notice 2 other sections, the attack curve and the decay curve. And for that, we're going to go back to Omnisphere to take a look at it. So here we have our attack, which is linear. Now, according to the manual, the attack curve can take your linear attack and make it more concave. So what this basically does is it sort of smooths out the attack at top, giving you a more rounded sound overall. So next we have our control section, or our play mode as I like to call it. To the very left, you have our pitch bend, which you can also adjust by simply dragging your mouse. And then we also have the play modes themselves, which are listed in this drop-down box. So we have polyphonic. Next, we have polyporta. It's polyphonic with portamento introduced and can be adjusted through the guide. Next, we have mono retrigger, just monophonic. We have mono legato, which will introduce portamento based upon how legatoli we play. We have mono porta, which will introduce the portamento every single time, no matter how we play. Next, we have release, which will allow the sound to come in after we release the notes on our MIDI controller or keyboard. You may have to look at the piano roll to get a better feel for this. And finally, we have an EP release, which is similar to the release, but it mimics the decay of an acoustic piano or electric piano. So next we have our color section, which you can toggle on and off with this red dot. And according to manual, it uses formant pitch shifting to color the sound. So for a negative value, the sound will darken. For a positive value, the sound will get brighter. You can also use the mod wheel to change the color by the amount of velocity. So the harder you hit, the more positive or the brighter the color will be. Below that, we have a knob for delay and random, which will obviously delay the sound or randomize it. Next to that, we have a velocity section, which you can set your velocity by double clicking or simply dragging up or down, and the keyboard range, which can set the particular area of the keyboard you want the sound heard from. Next, we have our mod wheel, and the mod wheel can be routed to adjust the pitch, the rate and depth. You can adjust the cutoff and resonance based upon your filter section, as well as the rate and depth based upon the LFO section. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about the filter and LFO section later. Let's go back to pitch. Here in pitch, you notice on the left, you can change to various types of waveforms, as well as you can sync this to your host or DAW, and the rate turns into measurements. So next we have our filter section, and let's start with the cutoff. So what exactly is the role of the filter? Well, imagine we have an electric piano sound, and we just wanted to isolate the low frequencies of that particular sound or that patch. Well, if we took an EQ and filtered out or took away the mid and high frequencies at a given certain point, that could then be looked at as the filter cutoff. Now, there are various types of filters. You have a low-pass filter, which filters out the highs, and high-pass filter, which filters out the lows. You also have a band-pass filter, which isolates a certain range of frequencies, or a notch, which filters out or takes away a certain frequency area. These are just a few examples.
Also in Pure Synth 2, you'll notice you'll have the res or the resonance knob. Basically, resonance takes the filter cutoff point and sort of boosts the frequencies just above it.
So what exactly does the envelope amount do? Well, imagine you have your cutoff knob, right? And you have a buddy standing next to you that's constantly adjusting the cutoff or the filtering of the sound up and down. Well, what if I didn't want him to do that? What if I wanted to do that manually? That's where the envelope amount comes into play. So let's review the basics to the filter section. We have our sound and frequencies shown on this EQ example. Let's pick a filter type. Let's choose a low pass. Next, we can use the cutoff to determine the starting point for our filtering. Adding resonance will boost the frequencies at the filter cutoff. And this brings us to the envelope amount. The envelope amount determines how much the filter will open past the cutoff and return back to it, or close before the cutoff point and move back to it. And the timing of this effect is created by our envelope settings themselves. So let's listen to what the filter section sounds like in Pure Synth 2. So here I have a filter demo preset. I have the filter engaged, and then I selected all three oscillators by holding down Control. Next, I'm going to dial back the cutoff a little bit and turn up the envelope amount. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Maybe add in a little bit of resonance. This time I'm going to turn the cutoff filter to the right, about here, and turn the envelope amount to a negative value. Next, we have the LFO section, or a low frequency oscillator. This is a great way to give your sound movement. Now keep in mind the LFO default mode shown here is labeled LFO will have an effect over your entire preset. We will discuss custom modulations with an LFO later in this video. So here I have a classic urban saw. And if you notice, the LFO is initially engaged, nothing happens. To the right, you have two LFO amount knobs, each with a drop-down box to assign your LFO routing. So for LFO 1, let's pick pan. Change or adjust the speed. And for LFO 2, let's pick cutoff. Now to the left here in the screen, you can pick by clicking various shapes for your LFO. On the bottom, you can sync the LFO to your DAW. And to the right here, you have a bipolar function. And for the sake of the tutorial, keep in mind most LFOs are bipolar and create a richer effect. So I tend to keep that engaged, as well as my retrigger, which basically resets the shape every time I hit a new note. So let's pick a different shape. We'll go with the ramp down and sync this to our DAW and see how that sounds. Maybe we'll pick a different speed. And below here, we have a delay knob, which can delay the LFO effect. And a fade knob, which will gradually fade in the effect. Let's take a look at the insert effects, the reverb effects, the master effects, and the mixer. In the insert effects, Pure Synth gives you 18 types
of effects to choose from and 5 slots to assign those effects. You can move these effects around to create a different chain. If you wish to delete an effect, you can right-click and hit None, or to change an effect, simply right-click and choose the new effect. Also, if you right-click on any of the settings, you can learn or map to MIDI, as well as create a custom modulation. The reverb section gives you 4 types of reverbs. It also includes a chorus. And on the Dreamverb, there's now an updated extensive library of various types of reverbs to choose from. The Master Effects section has 3 different effects: a limiter, a compressor. As a side note, if you also go into your filter section, you'll notice there's a drop-down menu for graphic EQ, and now you can sort of tweak the EQ for each oscillator individually. In our mixer section, we have sliders to control the volume of each oscillator, as well as a drop-down menu to quickly change oscillator types. To the right, we have our master volume. Below, our gain knobs for each oscillator, pan, and the insert effect sends and reverb sends. Now you'll notice on the master effects, reverb effects, and insert effects, there's a tab here that says series. You switch that to parallel. Now in your mixer section, you're able to kind of dial in the amount of effects or reverb you want. Below that, you also have mute and solo buttons for each oscillator. So let's talk about modulation, which equals change. So let's take a look at a few examples of how custom modulations work inside of Synth 2. So here I created a preset called Custom Mod, and in the first oscillator, I have a classic pop synth. Let's turn back the cutoff a little bit. Next, I'll right-click on the volume knob and assign this to an LFO mod. You'll notice a red indicator giving you the amount of modulation being applied. And down here in your LFO section, it now reads oscillator 1 volume. Click the drop-down arrow and go back to the global LFO settings as well. So let's sync this to our DAW. Choose a ramp down, turn up the speed, and turn the depth about right here. Next, I'll go to oscillator 3, and for here I've chosen a super saw. So for this, let's go into the filter section to oscillator 3, turn the envelope amount all the way down, and right-click on the cutoff and assign that to an LFO mod. You'll notice the screen displays filter 3 cutoff now. Let's sync that to our DAW. Turn the speed up, and turn the depth all the way up. And finally, I have a sine wave, which is just emphasizing or giving more weight to the bottom end. So let's hear all 3 together. Next, in our reverb section, I've chosen an F verb. Let's hear how that sounds. If I click here to the right, this function called gate, it'll sort of choke out the reverb after I release a note. In our master effects section, and sort of give clarity to the sound overall. Let's hear all this in context with the track. Let's look at saving presets. So instead of overriding the displayed preset here, we'll hit the drop-down arrow, go into User Presets. You need to add a bank. And from within that bank, also add a preset. You'll now notice in the LCD screen, your preset is displayed as 1, 2, 3. And from here, you can make any adjustments you wish. Well, thanks for hanging out with me today, YouTube, and checking out Synth 2. and maybe someone was able to make their first splash with synth design. Pure Synth 2 is available right now at gospelmusicians.com. And since you're headed that way, don't forget to check out the other resources and products to give you a few tools to help your music needs. See you next time.